So what do you do when the opportunity of a lifetime requires a one-time compromise? Well, let's talk about it on this week's episode of Journey at Home. So I want us to think about this question for a moment. What do you do when the opportunity of a lifetime requires just a little one-time compromise? For example, maybe it's a financial opportunity, it's going to set you for life. But to do it, you got to play in some gray areas that you don't normally play in. Or maybe it's that dream job opportunity, but to get it, you probably don't need to disclose everything you normally disclose. It's just a little compromise of your integrity, though. It's not bad. Or maybe it's a relationship and you really want to work, but to make that happen, you got to compromise on some of your values. You've got to ignore some red flags. So what do you do when the opportunity of a lifetime requires a one-time compromise? And what would you do if you had been waiting 13 years for that opportunity to come along? So this is episode 3 of our series, The Life and Times of Joe Jacobson. It is an ancient story that is full of extremes. Joseph's circumstances were worse than yours or mine, his wealth was greater than yours or mine, and his power was way beyond ours. But through it all, Joseph learned to maintain his faith in a God that he didn't know much about through all the highs and all the lows that he faced. And the real value, I think, of his story is this question that's at the heart of everything Joseph experienced. What would someone like you do who was confident God was with them? What would somebody in your current circumstances do if you had no doubt that God was with you? What would somebody with that opportunity in front of you do if they were confident God was by their side? Joseph's life is a testament to the power of that question. At 17 years old, Joseph's brothers fake his death, sell him into slavery. He ends up the slave of a powerful Egyptian captain named Potiphar. You'd think, well, there's rock bottom, right? Things do get a little better as Potiphar comes to trust Joseph. He puts him in charge of running the estate, which seems good until Potiphar's wife notices Joseph, tries repeatedly to sleep with him, and when Joseph refuses, she gets so mad she falsely accuses him of rape, and he's thrown into an Egyptian dungeon. So there's a worse, lower rock bottom, right? But Joseph's so responsible in prison that the prison warden has him overseeing some prisoners, which is not really the reward you want for doing the next right thing. But throughout this entire story, we find this strange statement repeated over and over again. The writer of the story says, the Lord was with Joseph. Problem is, that never seems to make things better for Joseph. It just makes things better for the people around Joseph. And I think that's a frustration we can all relate to. You know, you do the right thing, somebody else seems to benefit from it. You do the responsible thing, but things don't get better for you. But there's often more God is doing in those moments than we can see. So first, Joseph has one more rock bottom moment, and that's where we're going to pick up the story today, with Joseph still in prison. The story tells us that sometime later, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt both offended their master, the king of Egypt. And so Pharaoh was angry with his 2 officials, the chief cupbearer and this chief baker, and he puts them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, in the same prison where Joseph was confined. So the captain of the guard assigned them to Joseph, right? And so Joseph took care of them. And some time passes, like time always passes in prisons, very slowly. And then one day, Joseph decides to check on these palace workers, and he discovers that they have both had dreams that are troubling them. And so Joseph looks at them and says, hey, the God I follow, he knows the meaning of dreams. How about you 2 guys tell me your dreams? Let me see if God will show me what they mean. So the cupbearer tells him his dream. When he's done, Joseph says, oh, wow, I got great news for you. That dream means that in 3 days, the king's going to have you released from prison. He's going to give you back your job. And I'm sure Joseph is thinking, why wouldn't God do that for me? So he adds, but when all goes well with you, would you remember me? Would you show me kindness? Would you just mention me to Pharaoh? Would you get me out of this prison? And then he tells the guy a story. He says, I was forcibly carried off from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I've done nothing to deserve being put in a dungeon. And when the baker hears this, he gets all excited because the cupbearer just got great news. So he says, hey, Joseph, tell me what my dream means too. And so he gives him the dream, and Joseph looks back at him and says, well, you are going to be out of here in 3 days too. just not like you want. Pharaoh's actually going to have your head chopped off. He's going to impale your body on a pole. I could be wrong, but that's how I see it. And sure enough, everything happens 3 days later, just like Joseph said. But the story tells us the chief cupbearer, the one who went back to the palace, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. But cheer up, Joseph, because the Lord's with you, right? I mean, if this story teaches us anything, it's that bad things happen to people God's with. So, 2 more years pass with Joseph sitting right there in prison. Now he's 30 years old, and he's still forgotten. Until one night, Pharaoh has 2 troubling dreams. And so he gets up the next morning, he's asking all of his advisors, all of his officials what the dreams mean. And, well, nobody knows. And that's when the cupbearer pipes up and goes, excuse me, Pharaoh, I hate to remind you of this, but you remember that time that you got so mad at me, you had me thrown into prison? Well, while I was down there, I had a dream. There was this Hebrew guy who told me what that dream meant, and everything came true. So maybe you ought to ask him about your dreams. And so Pharaoh does. He calls for Joseph. Now, put yourself in Joseph's shoes. Can you imagine the uncertainty? Can you imagine the fear? At the same time, probably the excitement that Joseph must have felt. I mean, he's got to be wondering, have I done something to seal my doom? Or has the cupbearer finally remembered me? This might be that once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that I've been waiting for. So, they get Joseph all cleaned up. They change his clothes. They bring him into Pharaoh. And the story tells us that Pharaoh looks at Joseph and he says, all right, I had a dream. Nobody can interpret it. But I've heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. Now, think about the pressure that Joseph must have felt in that moment. He has waited 13 years for a chance to get his freedom back. And now this opportunity of a lifetime is his before the man who can change everything for him. And he's not going to get a second shot at this. It felt like everything was riding on what he said next. Have you ever been in one of those moments where it felt like your dreams or your livelihood or your big opportunity, well, it rode on what you did in that moment? Have you noticed how, we often act a little bit differently when we feel that pressure, don't we? Sometimes we'll just push our values to the back burner. Sometimes we get really insecure. Why is it so hard to be true to who we are and who we follow in those moments? Well, for Joseph, it is obvious. It's obvious to everybody around, at least, that Pharaoh holds his future in the palm of his hand. So you would think, well, now's the time to say what he wants you to say, Joseph. Now's the time to do what he wants you to do. Just, if nothing else, make up an interpretation and make it a good one, Present yourself as a little smarter or better than you are. Feel free to compromise just a little bit to get what you should have had all along, your freedom. But here's how Joseph replies. He looks back at the most powerful man in the world at that time and he says, no, I cannot do it. Can't do what? I can't interpret your dream. But, he says, God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. And I'm telling you, everybody in the throne room groaned because Pharaoh, well, he thinks he's God. So you don't look at Pharaoh and tell him, oh, your God's way more powerful than you are, Pharaoh. He knows way more than you do. I mean, that's going to get you killed. But in this moment, Joseph's just honest. And Pharaoh apparently has nothing to lose, so he just goes ahead and tells Joseph about the dreams. And then Joseph says, okay, Pharaoh, God's letting you know, here's what these dreams mean. He's letting you know that Egypt's going to experience 7 years of incredible harvest and abundance. But after that, you're going to experience 7 years of famine that is so devastating it wipes out all the abundance. That's what your dreams mean. It's a warning from God. And then Joseph does the unthinkable. He decides, standing there in the throne room as a prisoner, that he's going to give Pharaoh some unsolicited advice on how to run his country. So he says, all right, Pharaoh, one more thing. If I was you, I'd just find a really wise man to oversee all the nation's harvest for the next 7 years. I'd have that man take 20% of the crops during this season of abundance and store it away. So when the famine hits, well, you and the whole nation will have plenty to survive on. You'll be able to navigate through these years of scarcity. So do what you want, but there's my suggestion. Joseph may have added, I've been studying macroeconomics and political science all these years in prison. I think it'll work. I mean, why would anybody listen to him? But to the surprise of everybody in the room, Pharaoh takes his advice. He turns to Joseph, and imagine this moment. He turns to Joseph and he says, well, since God has made all this known to you, There's nobody more discerning and wise as you are. So you shall be in charge of my palace. You shall be in charge of all my people. They're all to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. He says, I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt. And Joseph goes from prisoner to prime minister in a day because he continued to do what someone would do, who was confident that his future wasn't actually in Pharaoh's hands. It was in God's. Now, here's what I don't want you to miss about this. Some of you right now are facing what seems like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And if you're not, you're going to have some of these moments in the future. And you will feel the pressure to compromise just a little bit, to set your values to the side just once, maybe to twist the truth just a bit so you don't blow it. You know, that job opportunity you dreamed about, or the chance to be married that you've waited on for years, or the leadership opportunity that it just feels like to you it's coming along once in a lifetime. Or maybe for you it's a financial opportunity that looks like, oh my goodness, if this will work out, I'll be set for life. But you're going to need to compromise just a little to get it. I mean, it's nothing terrible. I mean, you're not going to give them all the facts, that's all. Or this one time you'll just turn a blind eye to something that's wrong. Just once you won't be as ethical, or just once you'll bend the rules. Just this once you'll set aside your values and you'll deal with it later. You know, this one time you're going to make yourself look better than you know you are. Just this once, because the opportunity is so huge. But you don't know what you will miss if you do that. You have no idea what God might do through you and for you if you will trust Him even when it's hard. So before you go off and say yes, before you go in and misrepresent yourself, before you justify the temptation to compromise, I want to ask you this pesky, powerful question. What would you do if you were confident God's with you? I don't think you'd compromise. You know what I think you'd do? I think you'd do what Joseph did. I think you'd stay humble and true to what you value. I think you'd trust God with the outcome of your decision. You wouldn't try to manufacture or manipulate things on your own. I think you'd value your integrity more than your opportunity. And you trust that God will honor those who honor Him. So I don't know where you may be tempted to compromise, but I know this, it won't be worth it. It never is. So will you do what anyone would do who is confident God was with them? Would you stay humble? Would you stay true to what you value? And will you trust that God knows what's best for you? And we'll pick it up right there in the next and final episode of The Life and Times of Joe Jacobson.